I just woke up in the middle of the night remembering this, and I needed to get it off my chest. When I was about 16, my dad, brothers, and I lived in an old rundown house in the middle of nowhere. It was a private rental. My brother would do work for the landlord to pay our rent. Our landlord never came off as particularly creepy, but that could be because I rarely went outside whenever he came over to talk to my dad, and he wouldn't dare do anything in front of our dad. I was home alone one day. My dad and brothers went out somewhere, but I don't remember. I had my dog in a fenced-in yard outside, but that was it. I was in my room doing whatever I was doing, probably playing The Sims 2. We lived in the middle of nowhere, and there was a long driveway which the window of my bedroom directly faced. I could see or hear someone driving up the driveway. I saw a car that wasn't my dad's and immediately freaked out. I ran and shut all the blinds in the house, turned off all the lights, and checked to make sure the doors were locked. It was our landlord. He lived next door, about 2 miles away from our house, and yes, that was the closest house. This wasn't the first time he'd come here unexpectedly. It happened twice before, and both times I was home alone. Those first 2 times he was only there for about 10 minutes, walking around the outside of the house and then quickly leaving. But this time was different. I grabbed a big kitchen knife and hid under the kitchen table. I had heard him pull up outside and open our front gate. My dog outside was going crazy and barking. I heard him yell, "Oh, shut the hell up, you mutt!" I could hear his footsteps walking up to the door. He tried to open the front door, and I was freaking out. At this point, I texted my dad. He was coming straight home, but they'd still be like an hour. He continued to walk around outside of our house, trying to peek into each window. The house is old and has 3 doors that you can enter from the outside. He tried to open all 3 of them. I thought maybe he didn't know I was home. Maybe the last 2 times were just a coincidence. But he had started saying things, including calling out my name. He knew I was home alone. I couldn't hear what else he was saying through the double brick walls, but I quietly creeped through the house, following his voice up and down the hallway. I was trying to hear what he was saying. That's when he said something I'll never forget. "I'm going to burn down the house, but I'll let you out first." Of course, I didn't take him seriously, which scares me even more. He wanted me to come out. He wanted me to take this threat seriously. That's the part that gets me. I know exactly what would have happened if I had believed him, and my life would have been completely different. He was there for at least 30 minutes, maybe even closer to an hour. He was persistent. He eventually left before my dad came home. I told him everything and we moved out soon after. I still don't know how he knew I was home alone. My dad never saw him on the way driving out. So he knew my dad was gone, but how did he know I wasn't with him? I'm a female in my early 20s. I live alone with my mom in a relatively nice area in a section of the house our friend owns. I have some anxiety issues from a stalking incident in a prior area of town. So sometimes paranoia gets me, but I'm able to use logic to reason my way out of it 99% of the time. Our friend frequently travels and my mom has had health issues recently. Every person who lives here has to go outside and go through storm doors to the basement to access the laundry, and we have motion sensors through the basement and yard to help us see as we're walking. My front door has a small window with a broken blind or 2, so there's small peepholes. All of this is relevant information. Now on to what just happened about an hour ago, and I'm still shaking a bit from it. Our housemate is traveling, and my mom fell ill earlier. I told her to go to an emergency room and make sure nothing serious was happening, and I was left by myself, which isn't too uncommon. I'd been doing my normal routines when I remembered there was laundry in the dryer, so I got up and walked down my steps into the basement since I had left the storm doors open. Now is where you'd think the story would start. But surprisingly, my laundry routine went fine, and I closed the storm doors and proceeded back up the stairs to my section of the home. I had to pee, so the second I closed the door, I placed the bin down and had the thought to lock my door tonight. Something I don't tend to do because my mom is a smoker, and hearing the locks at night is very loud and will wake me up. I didn't, which could have been a huge mistake. I used the bathroom and ended up taking longer than I needed to, scrolling around on social media. I remember all the clean clothes, so I had stripped mostly naked besides underwear, and I threw on a pair of shorts. And as I grabbed a shirt to throw on, my heart, brain, gut, and everything screams, "Door, now, locks." In that brief second, thankfully my body responded and took the 2 steps forward to the door. I then tried to lock the door, but the knob wouldn't move. That only ever happens if the knob is being turned, and I know for a fact that I wasn't turning it. I locked the secondary lock and slammed my back into the door, waiting a minute to test the doorknob lock again, hoping it would work. Thankfully this time it did, and while I hadn't noticed at first, the motion sensor light had activated far too long after I was already inside for me to have done it. And they're such shitty lights I have to wave my hands in front of them occasionally to activate, so I'm 95% sure someone else was out there. I sat with my back to the door for God knows how long before I then got up and turned most of the lights out and then grabbed a knife that I'll have next to me all night now. I looked out both windows that faced that direction after a while and saw nothing, luckily, because I don't know what I would have done. So yeah, to whoever was turning the doorknob outside of the house, I really hope you don't come back. One evening, I was out in Lacey, Washington to pick up a handgun that I had recently purchased for protection. Contrary to the pickup status both online and sent to my email, the store didn't have it in stock yet and told me to come back in another week. I lived about an hour from Lacey at the time, and when I had gotten there, evening rush hour was just beginning to become unbearable. I didn't want to drive all the way back home just yet, as it would add an additional hour to my already long commute. Side note, the car I was driving belonged to my dad, and I was just borrowing it until I had enough money saved up for a new car after my beloved Honda had broken down just the previous year. I killed some time bumming around the store I had purchased my firearm from, then decided to drive over to the nearest coffee shop. It was a newly built cabin-style cafe with a modern twist. The barista handed me my 16-ounce dirty chai, and I walked back out to my car. I then drove to a gas station around the corner, still trying to kill some time until traffic thinned out. The car didn't need gas, so I pulled into a parking spot right at the corner of the 4-way street block the gas station was on. I turned off the engine, stepped outside, and lit up a smoke, leaning against the driver's side door so as to not stink up the interior. The weather was overcast and drizzly, but not overly cold. It was now dusk and most daylight had disappeared. The stoplights in the intersection were diffused by the late autumn mist. I watched them flicker from green to yellow to red, and again as the traffic was orchestrated accordingly. Zoned out by the lights and being generally lost in thought while enjoying my coffee and smoke, I didn't notice the man walking toward me until he was already halfway across the street. He was white, average height, and strawberry blonde, maybe in his mid-20s. He definitely hadn't changed his clothes in a good while, and he carried a backpack, I assumed to be full of the few belongings that he had. He didn't smell, but he looked raggedy and unkempt. My immediate thought was that drugs were likely a part of his habitual lifestyle. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but I'm always cautious having grown up in the suburbs of Seattle. The man finished crossing the street, awkwardly limping toward my car, maintaining eye contact and a winced grin. I locked my car out of caution, but I remained outside smoking casually. Normally, I'm not a social person, but I don't go out of my way to be unpleasant either. He approached me and he stood about 10 feet away when he then said, "Hello there," and asked if I had a light. I complied hesitantly, but saw no harm in meeting his simple request. Taking 2 steps forward, I lit a cigarette which he was holding out toward me while approaching. He attempted to make small talk, weaving in hints that he had just gotten off the bus and still needed to get down the road another block. Somewhere in his poorly crafted sob story, he had stopped himself mid-sentence like a bad actor and pretended to be struck by an epiphany. "Hey, would you mind dropping me off down the road? It's not that far." I apologized and said I couldn't help because it was my dad's car and not my own, and I didn't feel comfortable without my father's permission. Some stupid yet plausible excuse which I came up with on the spot. Mr. Unkempt did not like my answer, and his smile immediately turned tense and flatlined. Clearly upset, he became more insistent. "Oh, come on, but it's just down the road," he whined. "Come on, man, my leg is killing me, and it wouldn't even be that far for you. I'll give you a cigarette." His persistence and sudden burst of hostility made my hair stand up. I then firmly said, "No, man, I'm sorry, I can't help you. It's my dad's car and he has set rules." Again, absolute bullshit. With about 10 years of hospitality under my belt, I immediately offered him alternate logical ideas of what he could do to get to where he needed to be. I even mentioned maybe someone in the gas station we were waiting outside of could help him out or call him a ride. Each word I said made him increasingly irate, and he began curling his fingers into fists, not in a threatening way, but like a toddler about to scream bloody murder for not getting their way. He seemed to pause and size me up in a fleeting moment. I'm small and not at all intimidating physically, so I told him that I hope he makes it home safe, quickly unlocked my car, jumped in and locked myself inside. When looking up from locking the car door, I see him speed walking back across the street from the direction that he originally came from. No limp, no awkward walk whatsoever, no distress or pain showing even slightly. Just a normal speed walk of a physically well person, a rageful person. I knew then that I had dodged a bullet, and I felt pretty dumb for hanging around the city after dark alone. At that point, I didn't even care about the traffic anymore. So I turned over my engine and hightailed it home in what ended up being an hour and 45-minute drive. But this time the traffic was 100% worth the inconvenience. PSA if you haven't heard it enough already. Be careful who you give your attention to, especially when you're alone. Stay aware and always be cautious, even when strangers seem harmless at first. Crazy bad acting hitchhiker guy. I really hope that you got the help you needed, rather than the help that you wanted. I'm a 22-year-old female. About a week ago, I had met this guy at some bar in Michigan. My friend and I were playing this game where we made up fake names to give out, so I gave him a fake name. He seemed nice and funny, and we had a good time together. Kissed a couple of times, danced together, etc. At one point in the night, I had posed next to this photo booth and he took a pic of me. But I found out he was way too old for me, and I'm not really looking for anything serious. So at the end of the night when he asked for my number, I told him no, and then I left and got onto the ferry that takes everyone back to the mainland. But then he got on too and sat with me even though his friends were still back at the bar. I asked what he was doing and he then said, "Well, I'm coming back with you." To which I then said, "No, my uncle would kill you." And he then said, "Not if I kill him first." He said it jokingly, but it still freaked me out, and I didn't like that he got on the boat with me. I told him when we got back to the mainland that he had to stay on the ferry and go back. He said fine, and he did. Then a couple of days ago, I got a notification. He found my Instagram and DM'd me that he found me and missed me. I had no idea how he found me, because again, I gave him a fake name and no information whatsoever. The only thing I can think of is that he had reversed image searched the picture that he took of me and found my Instagram there. I told him that was creepy, and I told him he was way too old for me and to not contact me again, Then I blocked him. I feel like it was a huge breach of my privacy. Obviously, if I'm not giving you my information, I'm not interested. I'm just worried now that this is going to go further. I really hate how he found me only using a pic of me. It freaks me out. And I really feel guilty, like this was my own fault for kissing him and dancing with him and letting things get a little heated on the dance floor. But I mean, I had no idea it would turn into this. I live near a small city where we do most of our shopping at. For reference, I'm a female, and I was also engaged by this time, and I'd lost a lot of weight and was pretty fit for our wedding. We also went target shooting together, so I was pretty decent with my firearm, and we both legally conceal carry everywhere we went. We never had to use them because my husband has a rugged, mean look to him that usually deters most people. By this time, the local Walmart became a bad area for suspicious behavior, which never seemed to be resolved by the police during this time. There was often a white commercial van in the parking lot this year, and it was very common to see Facebook posts about Hispanic men following women and children throughout the aisles at night at Walmarts all over the country. Many instances where they would try surrounding these victims. My now husband and I went to Walmart to grab a few snacks and go look around the store. He came in with me but immediately split off from me, saying he would be back at the sportsman section while I go grab chips from the opposite side of the store. We continued on and I headed to the chip aisle, searching for the specific bag my husband wanted. I noticed a man at the end of the chip aisle while I was somewhere searching the center shelves. I didn't think much of it, and I didn't even acknowledge to the man that I had noticed him. I just continued searching for the chips. I had trouble finding the brand I was looking for, so I walked to the next aisle, avoiding passing the man to search there. The man came around to the aisle from the opposite side, acting as if he was also searching. I now noticed this man was dark-complected, maybe of Mexican descent. By this point, my guard was up, because seeing Hispanic people in my city is super rare, and especially at night. And I remembered reading a post about Walmart following just earlier that week. But I tried not to assume and just continued my shopping. Another one of these men ended up joining the first one, and they both seemed to be reading the back of the products together, and continue reading several products in hand. I never found the chips, so I decided to test my judgment of these men, and went back to the aisle that I had originally found them, again avoiding passing them, acting as if I still couldn't find the chips. These men only took 30 seconds to continue back to the aisle with me. Again, the opposite side of the aisle. But now there were 3 of them in the exact area where I saw the first one. I continued acting completely unaware, playing off like I was content. I then texted my now husband that I was being followed. I will say by this point I had all plans to use my firearm if I needed to, and I still think having it on me was the only reason that I wasn't scared. He texted me back that he was still in the sportsman section, but will start walking my way, and he asked me to meet up with him. I agreed. I put my phone away and continued my act, looking at the chips one last time and then shrugged, giving these men the idea that I'd given up my search. I had started walking at a normal pace towards my husband. Only a few seconds after walking, I could see my husband from a distance. He had his thumbs in his front pocket jeans like he was resting his hands, but I knew that he was prepared to use his firearm. I will say that this made me feel so comforted that I literally smiled, knowing I was going to be safe by this point. As I reached halfway, I could hear the footsteps a few feet behind me, but I still acted completely unaware. I noticed my husband staring at them with his protective stance and stone-cold facial features. As I got close enough to touch him, that's exactly what I did. I walked into him gently with a hug while he was still watching them, and I then heard running footsteps scatter behind me. He took a moment to check around, still with his solid, mean face. Then he silently directed me to start walking in front of him. We have a mutual understanding that his silence usually means it's time to go, so I started out of the store with him behind me, neither one of us with any purchases. Sure enough, there was a white van only a few rows from his car. On the way home, I had asked him how many were following me since I couldn't see behind me while walking to him. I should have never asked because it scared me a bit. I expected about 3 or 4, but no, he said there were 7 of them. My name is Vanessa. I'm a 29-year-old female, and this incident happened when I was 19 years old. In 2013, I worked at a Chinese restaurant in a small town in Northern California. I worked part-time, so I would get off work at about 8 p.m. The restaurant usually wasn't busy around 7:30 p.m., so I would start my closing duties around then. I was gathering all the trash bags to take out before I clocked out for the night. The restaurant is directly next door to a gas station, and the whole area isn't well lit, so it was pretty dark outside. The dumpster is gated near the restaurant as well as the gas station. Both places have cameras, but the restaurant cameras were not facing the dumpster. The gas station only had one camera facing the dumpster in the bathroom area. The parking lot for the restaurant was completely empty, and there was one black car and one red truck with white stripes on the side at the gas station. I opened the gate to the dumpster and threw away the bags of trash. When I was done, I had closed the gate. When I turned around to face the gas station, the truck was coming closer to where I was standing. Now, the dumpster is in an open area so that any car or truck can drive up to it. Now, as the truck was pulling up to me, I tried to move out of the way, but the person accelerated a bit, and it then trapped me between the truck as well as the gate surrounding the dumpster. As the person did this, I then asked really loudly, "What do you want?" Now, as I mentioned before, it was dark outside, and there weren't really any streetlights around, so I didn't see the person's face, but I could tell by the big silhouette that it was a man driving. I asked again what he wanted, and all he did was reach out with his hand to grab me. When he started to do this, I then yelled out, "Get away from me!" And I did this about 2 times. Someone from the gas station ran out to see what the commotion was. When the clerk had noticed how close the truck was, he ran up to help me, yelling, "Hey, get away from her!" The truck reversed quickly and then drove off, almost running into another car and running a red light. The gas station clerk asked me if I was okay, and I started to cry as I explained what happened. He walked me back to the restaurant and told the owner and his wife what happened. They had asked the clerk if the camera caught the license plate number, but the clerk said no because the camera was broken and had been for a while. After that happened, the owner of the restaurant took the trash out every night himself, and I believe that the gas station had the camera fixed, with even a few new ones installed as well. I had traveled to Seoul, South Korea for a week by myself back in 2018. Because I was still studying and Seoul is expensive, I decided to book a room in a hostel. It was supposed to be a mixed dorm for 6 people. Upon arrival, I found out that I was actually going to be sharing a room with 5 other men who were already staying at the hostel. At that point, I was still quite naive and didn't think much of it. Besides, the hostel was already fully booked. There was 1 guy from Japan, 1 Korean, 2 Chinese, and a German in my room. The German guy gave me really weird vibes from the beginning, especially by the way he'd just stare at me. But I brushed it off because I'd been out and about all day. Every day he'd asked if I wanted to hang out and go see the sights together, which I really liked to do on my own, so I just always came up with an excuse. One time I accepted his invitation to explore Gangnam, and it was just awkward. We had very little to speak about besides small talk. When I'd get ready in the morning, he'd just stand there and watch, saying nothing. I got annoyed and I asked him if he didn't have to be somewhere else several times. He'd just shrug. Anyway, for the entire week, I was just really weirded out, but did my best to avoid him. One time we ran into each other at the cafe in the city center, which I found strange because what are the odds of that? Now, the other guys in my dorm room were actually really nice. We even all went out to dinner one night. Then on my very last day, I woke up too early and then drifted back to sleep. The next time I woke up, it was to him sitting by my bedside and caressing my arm and shoulder. I immediately sat straight up and asked what he was doing. Even though it was only my arm he was touching, I still felt so disgusted. I always thought of myself as someone who'd scream and curse at someone in a situation like this, but I was just simply dazed and shocked. Well, he then went on to confess his love for me, how he wanted to meet up when we were back home and how I was just so special, which by the way, I'm from Germany too. When I pointed out he couldn't possibly fall in love with me because it had only been a week, he insisted that he just knew and that he wanted to show me his affection. Now, at this point, I was just nauseous. Of course, he was leaving that morning too and had offered to go to the airport together. I then insisted on taking a later bus, and he thankfully left it at that. I couldn't wait for him to just go on and leave me alone. I'm glad I didn't run into him at the airport, but at some point I just burst into tears because it had been so exhausting to ward off his advances all week and then gently tell him that I wasn't interested in him after he'd fucking touched me while I was sleeping. I don't even know how I managed to remain so calm and polite to him, but who knows how he would have acted if I'd been aggressive. With hindsight, I think I could have insisted to switch rooms, but up until that very last morning, nothing had actually happened. And I would just tell myself that maybe the poor guy was just awkward but didn't mean it. After that, I never doubted my own instincts again. For context, this happened when I was 19 in my first year in college, and I'm a female. I never thought a school could become a nightmare until my psych professor, who we'll call Mr. Thornton for the purpose of this story, turned it into one. It started innocently. Odd glances that lingered too long, and a feeling of being watched. But soon it escalated. He started showing up everywhere I went, as if he knew my every move. The park, the grocery store, even my own street. I lived in a rental home off campus with one roommate who I barely spoke to. Every time I turned around, there he was, his eyes locked onto mine. I confided in friends and my roommate, but they just brushed it off as paranoia. One evening as I walked home, I had heard footsteps echoing mine. My pace quickened, but the footsteps matched, growing closer. Panic set in when I then realized it was Mr. Thornton. His twisted smile sent shivers down my spine. Fear consumed me, and I changed my routine. I took different routes, but he always found me. My grades had plummeted as I couldn't focus in class, constantly aware of his gaze. I confided in a trusting teacher hoping for help, but nothing changed. They said he was just friendly, and the reason I must be seeing him so much is because the campus is small and it just must be a coincidence. But that doesn't explain him showing up on my street or the store. One night I woke up to the sound of tapping on my window. Dread filled the room as I saw Mr. Thornton's silhouette, his eyes fixated on me. I slammed the blind shut, trembling in terror. I called the police, but by the time they got there, he was of course gone. All they could do for me was write a report and say with no proof I was unable to file a restraining order. Therefore the stalking continued, his presence an inescapable nightmare. I felt like a prisoner trapped in his twisted game. One day he cornered me in a deserted hallway with a sinister grin etched across his face. My pleas fell on deaf ears, and he whispered, "You're the most beautiful person I've ever seen." I managed to push him away from me and then run down the hall and out to the courtyard. I immediately ran home. I reported him to the authorities, but again, they couldn't do anything, and the nightmare persisted. My sleep was haunted by his face, my days clouded by the constant fear of his presence. The school turned a blind eye, and my pleas for help echoed in empty hallways. In the end, I went back to my home state just hoping for a fresh start. I enrolled in community college there and eventually graduated, but the memory of Mr. Thornton's sinister pursuit has always lingered. A chilling reminder that nightmares aren't always confined to dreams. They can walk among us, disguised as teachers in the halls of the familiar. This happened only a few days ago. A little background information. I decided to visit my Nana for a little while since it's been a few months since I'd seen her. The neighborhood my Nana lives in is not the best. A lot of drug use, bad people, you get it. Anyways, since there was nothing eventful going on, I decided to go outside and walk around the front of the house, messing with things here and there and playing with Groot, a Siberian husky my Nana has. I soon noticed two guys who looked to be in their mid-20s walking up and down the street next to our house. I didn't think anything of it since it's normal to see people walking around in the street even when it's close to dark. Continuing on without giving much acknowledgement to the men, I bent down to pick up a lock I'd found. When I did, I could feel their eyes on me. I turned around only to see them both smiling at me with huge, almost sinister smiles. They then walked to the front of our house and just stayed there watching me while looking over the house. This went on for about 10 minutes before they finally walked away, but it didn't end there. Since I still wanted to be outside, I continued to walk around and mess with things as I did before, and soon enough, they had come back. Now, I'm a shy, antisocial person, so I just ignored them, acting as if I didn't even see them, and continued to pet on Groot. I then felt someone grab my hips, and I shit you not, I jumped forward when I looked up, and one of the men were standing there grinning. He had brown messy hair which really fit his whole dirty attire. It was the same for his friend, only he had blonde hair and a bit ungroomed facial hair. They both smelled horrible. It was a mix of trash and weed. He then reached out to pet our dog, but jerked back when Groot barely missed biting his hand and letting out a deep low growl. The man then mumbled, "Stupid mutt," and then asking me, "So how old are you?" I stopped for a second, still surprised that he had touched me, and a little upset that he had called the dog I've grown up with a stupid mutt. I then quietly said, "I'm 13, to which he then replied with, "Well shit, you look grown to me." He then walked over to his friend and whispered something to him. It must have been funny because they had both started laughing. He then walked over back beside me and just stared me down. To give you a mental image of this, I'm a 5', 13-year-old girl standing in the middle of two what looks like grown men. So needless to say, my anxiety was really kicking in. He then reaches in his pocket and he pulls out a little cloth with something inside it. He then grins and then says, "Here, smell this." I just back away and say no thanks. He glances up at his friend and then back down at me before walking a little closer and then saying, "Oh come on, please, it'll make you feel good." His friend then snickers before mumbling something under his breath which I couldn't hear. Groot starts barking at the men and I walk around them and then say, "No, I'm good. I think I should be heading inside now." They both then watch me as I walk inside with Groot without saying a word. Fast forward about an hour later, and my Nana tells me she has to run to the store real quick, and without thinking, I just say okay and lock the door behind her. A little while after she left, I had heard Groot start going crazy, barking and growling at something. Well, I walked out of my room, and I went to go see what or who he was barking at. I crept over the large window that's in my Nana's living room, and I looked outside to see the guys from before slowly backing up from the door, then walking away from the house. When my Nana arrived home, I had told her what happened, and she called the cops. But since the police in my town are pretty shitty, they didn't really do anything but just say, well, they were probably just messing around. I wouldn't worry too much about it. So yeah, that's my story, and I really hope I don't see those guys again. Back around the time when the spooky clowns were popular and sightings were going around in the United States, I had my own encounter with one. One night, just after the sun had barely gone down, back in September of that year, I was still living at home with my parents due to losing my job, and my fiance was a semi-truck driver that went out during the week and was home on the weekends. I was sitting at my parents' computer playing games and listening to music at the time when I got this funny feeling. At first, I put it off as I would normally get these feelings from time to time. About 20 minutes later, I got that feeling again, but this time I also got that feeling like you're being watched. I turn around and look over my shoulder at the computer room door, but I don't see my parents or the house cats. I turned my attention back to what I was doing, and again the feeling went away. Later on, about 30 minutes go by, and I get the watching feeling yet again, and this time it wasn't going away, and it scared me. Now, I forgot to mention, but there are 2 windows that look out of this bedroom window. One on your left while sitting at the desk, and one on your right. The left window has a clear view to the neighbor's house and front yard. Past that, you can see down the street to the end of the block. There's a tree line in between my neighbor's yard and ours, but it's not thick and full of trees, but most of them are dead. Anyway, I looked out the right window and I didn't see anything. I couldn't for some reason look out the left window because I knew that's where I would see something. I slowly turned my head just so I could see just out of the peripherals that there was something standing there. It was wearing all black except the face. The face was kind of white in another color, but at the time I couldn't tell. My heart started racing and my eyes widened. Now I knew for a fact something was there because it wasn't moving. I turned my head a little bit more, and then I saw it. A person with a creepy clown mask on. I froze, and I couldn't move no matter what I tried. The clown lifted a finger up to its mouth, making the shush motion. I felt my breath and heart race even faster, because in the other hand it looked like he had a knife. I just sat there for what felt like forever, until the clown walked to the window and then tapped on it with the knife and then started to cut the screen. I immediately unfroze and ran out into the living room where my dad was at the time, and then told him everything I saw. He got up and then went to the window, and he then saw the screen was ripped open. He then called my mom into the room, and we both pointed at the window screen. She gasps in horror and immediately grabs her cell phone to call the police. I stayed with her while my dad went outside and looked around the house for this clown, but he never did find him. As the police arrived, I had told them the story of what happened the same way I told my parents. After they took my statement, the officer went outside and looked at the window and around it. He saw wood chips in the ground, as well as footprints that led into the woods behind our house. I never found out what happened after that night, if the police caught the clown or not. But all I know is, if that clown got through that window and I was home alone, I really don't think I'd be here today. When I was about 25, I was living with my boyfriend at the time in a 1-bedroom apartment in San Diego. Our apartment building was on a main road next to other apartments and shopping centers, and was pretty busy during the daytime. But at nighttime, it was definitely a quieter road. We had just gotten a puppy together, a little gray-spotted pit bull who was only around 3 months at the time. So he was still really little, and therefore wouldn't be able to protect me in public from any weirdos. Before I dive deep into the story, I think it's important to highlight that at this time in my life, I was really into listening to true crime podcasts, and I had recently purchased the book The Gift of Fear, written by Gavin de Becker, her recommendation of the Crime Junkies podcast. I was only a few chapters into this book at the time, but basically it highlights the fact that our bodies will send us in a fight or flight response signal way before we're even aware of dangerous or sketchy situations are about to happen. Even if it is just a gut feeling of feeling a little off, of feeling like someone is watching you or getting goosebumps by just looking at a stranger we don't know. Along with my knowledge of true crime, the basic points I learned in this recently purchased book, and my dad's strict nature and repetitive lectures about stranger danger situations, I feel like I have a good sense of identifying sketchy situations and not writing them off in the moment just so I can be polite in public. On the day of this incident, I was just getting home pretty late from my friend's house who lived only about 10 minutes away. I had just brought the puppy over to hers for a little while to play with and to hang out together for the night, and I didn't end up getting back home with the puppy until about 10:30 p.m., so pretty late for a weekday. We only had street parking where we lived, so I parked my car right off the busy road that I mentioned earlier, and then gathered my stuff inside the car before I opened my car door. For the time I lived in this apartment, there would sometimes be random homeless people or people on drugs who would wander down the street during the day. For this reason, I always check outside my car windows and rearview mirrors before I get out of my car, just to be sure that there aren't any weirdos or sketchy people outside waiting for me. The coast was clear when I checked outside my mirrors, so I proceeded to get out of my car, grab my things, and then get my puppy out of the passenger side. Just as I was almost finished gathering my belongings and my pup, a low-rider type of car pulled up just ahead of me. It parked right outside another small apartment complex that I had to walk past to get to my building. This didn't seem odd at first, because my initial thought was they were either dropping someone off or picking someone up from that exact apartment. Still, I was wary of the car because it was so late at night, and I'm usually paranoid for my own safety. It had to have been around 1 minute that the car was just sitting there. To me, it felt like too long of a time, to be honest, and I was really confused why no one was, 1, exiting the vehicle, or 2, coming out of the apartment complex to get into the car. I went ahead and shut my passenger side door, locked the car, and then slowly started to walk back to my apartment building. I had to have only taken about 7 slow steps before I got this weird pit feeling in my stomach, like I should turn back and not pass by the car that was just sitting there. At that moment, I quickly noticed that there were 4 guys all sitting in the car, with one sitting in the passenger seat just staring back at me out the right side view mirror. They had to have been around my age, late 20s or early 30s, but to be honest, they looked a bit sketchy. Not like random guys my age you would see populate San Diego. They didn't look like they were from the area. I don't know how to explain it, but my brain was just taking in as much info as it could because I was a bit sketched out. Immediately, I also felt a bit of guilt for thinking this way. Just profiling strangers as being sketchy when they hadn't exactly done anything yet. After all, I'm probably just being paranoid. Plus, my apartment was so close already. What is the worst that could happen? I could probably try and run if they jumped outside the car. But considering I had a 3-month-old puppy with me and 3 bags that I was carrying inside, I would be slowed down, and I didn't want to risk that chance. I decided to turn around and walk back to my car, acting like I had forgot something else inside that I needed to get. I opened my passenger side door again, and just pretended to shuffle around the inside while I kept an eye at the car out of my peripheral. They still were just sitting there with the car in idle, with that man still staring at me out of the rearview mirror. I immediately called my boyfriend as he was just inside the apartment. I figured it would be best if he came outside and at least walked me inside. I called him. No answer. I called again. No answer. And then finally he calls me back. Bless. I answer and I proceed to tell him all about the sketchy car situation quickly, and I ask him to come outside as fast as he can. I was just far away from the men in the car that they couldn't hear my conversation, and I figured it helped to at least be on the phone with someone in case they did try to do anything. It felt like 10 minutes before my boyfriend finally came out, but was probably only about 2 minutes in reality. But when he did, he managed to walk at a normal pace toward me from afar, not quick enough if I might add. The men in the car didn't immediately put two and two together that I knew this guy until he finally made his way to me and then helped me grab two of the bags that were in my hand. The second they realized this guy was my boyfriend, they sped off as fast as they could down the road. But that's not it. Up ahead down the road, they made a quick donut-style U-turn back towards us, and my heart began to race yet again. They drove up really slowly on the other side of the road, just mean-mugging me and my boyfriend, all four of them. Such a really weird-ass stare-down situation. And once again they sped off, making an immediate quick right, just skirting off back to another main crossroad. I immediately called the police to report the vehicle as well as the direction I saw them headed. But being that San Diego is a pretty big city and I didn't get the license plate number, there wasn't much else I could do, and I never found out if they were pursued or not. Needless to say, I've since analyzed the incident, and I kind of believe they were either trying to steal my puppy or steal me. I know a lot of people try to steal pit bull puppies for illegal dog fighting in the area, so that could have been it. Or more sinister, they could have been trying to kidnap me for whatever reason, such as sex trafficking, as it is super common in the Southern California area. There had actually been quite a lot of PSAs about sex trafficking in San Diego becoming more popular around this time. Regardless, I wouldn't have been able to take on 4 grown-sized men alone, even if I did have a can of pepper spray on me. Whatever the reason, I'm happy that I escaped a potentially dangerous situation, and I'm also very thankful that I happened to have just started reading that book telling me to trust my gut. Otherwise, I'm really not sure I would have trusted my gut reaction telling me to turn back to my car. Always trust your gut, people. Don't ever feel bad for being rude to protect your safety, and don't write yourself off as being paranoid. It's better to be safe than sorry. Also, get a dog to protect you if you can. I don't have my dog anymore because I'm no longer with my boyfriend from that time, but when our puppy grew up, I felt way more safe walking around the neighborhood. He was such a love bug whenever he met people, but if I was walking around alone at night, he always had his guard up and would definitely protect me if prompted to. To the 4 men in that car that I came across that day, I don't know what you had planned for me, but I'm so glad that you either changed your mind or that you weren't successful. Hey everyone, that's about it for today's stories. If you have your own story that you would like to send, you can send it in at southerncannibal.com, or you can email it at southerncannibal.stories@gmail.com. I look forward to telling your story. Have a good night or good day, everyone, and remember to always